It helps when I unmute myself. Sorry, I thought Blitz had gotten the panelists set up correctly, but I guess not quite everybody.
Okay, can you hear me?
I can.
Excellent, excellent. Glad to hear it. Need a refill. We'll be right back.
Sounds good.
Oh, dear Lord. Oh, that's better.
Welcome back. So, Walter, is it just you on this panel, or do you have more coming?
No, I'm not a member of the panel, to be honest with you. I just dropped in.
That's what I was. Yeah, that's what I was wondering if you were a member or not. So
no.
Then if you don't mind, I'm going to drop you off until we do get the panel and I know what they're going to want to do about Q&A. So, all right, Walter, you may have to refresh your browser after I drop you off to join later. So, hi, Carl, you are muted. We cannot hear you. Nope. Unless I'm having a problem. Can anyone else hear Carl? Far from the first technical difficulty we have had today.
It did this to me before.
There you go.
For some reason, it wants to go with my headphones mic, even when my headphones aren't plugged in. So
it's weird. Welcome.
Thanks. You were asking about Q&A earlier.
Yeah.
I was just going to keep an eye on the chat if there's questions in there. And then I planned on leaving the last 10 minutes or so for just kind of an open question.
Great. Then I will cut off my audio video, and unless we get a bunch of questions backed up, and I will then go ahead whenever you are ready.
Okay. Just by way of introduction, I'm Carl Rossi. I work I'm the publisher at Rossi Publishing Games. We'll be, like I mentioned, we'll be cutting short probably around 2:10 con time to make sure that there's any questions and whatnot that can be answered. I will warn you in advance, I have a tendency to ramble. I'm bad enough at it that actually most of the time when we order art, I have the author do that because the author can say something in about a paragraph, and I'll take a lot more than one paragraph. Just by way of who we are, why I'm qualified to even be talking about this. Rossi Publishing Games is what you might call a micro publisher. We have 3 books out right now. We've got, let's see if we can get that showing. The Terra novels. We've got The Wolf's Pawn, which is the first in the series. Fawcent. And this one here is currently on pre-order, Fugitives Trust. They're by the author Chaya Chandra. We work with her, and like I mentioned, if I need artwork done, like the Fawcent and the Fugitives Trust were both done by, the covers were done by Golden Druid. Chaya handles those now. I think Golden Druid prefers that. Just by the way of background, I started playing, we mostly do role-playing game supplements. I'm going to concentrate on the novels, but I got an early start with that. I started in 1976. So when I do the local game store games, The running joke is there that I've been playing role-playing games longer than any two of those people have been alive. Let me know. Our AC here just kicked on, and sometimes that messes things up. Let me know in chat if it's causing a problem, and I'll go turn it off. I don't want to get overheated, though. With the role-playing games, a bunch of the companies went with open licensing, and that's where we got involved with it. Up until that point, I pretty much just played Pathfinder and 3.5, although obviously I didn't start with 3.5. I got to meet some of the people at Paizo, and the problem is, I'll tell people I've worked with these people at Paizo, and then they automatically assume that I'm good friends with these people. Like, for instance, if you've heard of Sean K. Reynolds, he was the guy who designed Baldur's Gate. You can mention my name to him, and he'll go, "Yeah, I know that guy." Beyond that, no. So I'm not dropping names on that, but I have worked with the people before. Girl Genius came along, if you're familiar with Phil and Kaja Folio's webcomic, and that inspired us to create the steampunk world of Terra. My background in publishing, I started trying to write my first book when I was in 2nd grade. I failed miserably. I think I got maybe 500 words out, but for a 2nd grader, you know, that's really good. I did my first major short story was in the 6th grade, and I took journalism in high school. When I was taking journalism, that's when I noticed that while I really enjoy writing, I really, really enjoy what goes into publishing. I just was fascinated by all this stuff that actually they don't use in the industry anymore. But we used to do the layout with the newspaper. We do the layout with rubber cement and chopped up little bits of paper and pasting them all over the place, and it was a lot of fun, and I really enjoyed that. And I loved going down to the newspaper printing press and seeing that big web press fire up and be spitting out copies of our school newspaper. And I think that's where I started getting interested in that. So when I went off to college, I worked for a semi-professional magazine based at the college called The Leading Edge Magazine, and that's where I got my start. I came in on the summer semester, and so they were short-staffed, and I ended up on the staff like right away, not because I was qualified, but because I was there. I worked as the assistant marketing director, which pretty much meant I went around putting up flyers for the upcoming magazine that was coming out. From there, though, because I already had experience, I went on to be the fiction director the next semester. Fiction director is a lot closer to what people think of when they think of what I do as a publisher. My job as a fiction director was we would get all these submissions coming in, and I would have to take the submissions and process them in a way that would allow our readers to read them. The readers would then grade them. I would tally the grading, and from there, make a determination if I was sending the rejection letter or if it was going on to the executive board. I had two really big claims to fame there that are kind of funny and interesting. When I took over, they had a 100-story backlog. Now, realize that they were a very small publication, and we were lucky to process, at the time, 3 stories a week. We met weekly, and we were lucky to get 3 stories processed, which meant most of the time 3 rejections done a week. So a 100-story backlog was pretty huge. My claim to fame was I got rid of that. I changed some stuff on the system and got it so that it worked faster. What did that mean for the poor people that were submitting? It meant that I made it a lot easier to reject your story and a little bit harder for it to be accepted. But it did do the way with the backlog. And the other claim to fame that I like to tell people about because it illustrates really well one of the things you need to worry about as an author. And I'll get more into word count in a little bit, but there was one story where we got it in, and I was one of the first readers on it. And I read that whole horrible, awful, 25-page or so, hideous, absolutely terrible story. And I'll tell you the title of it, because if you do get a chance to go to the leading edge, I believe it was in issue 17 or 18. You can look it up and read it, and it's called Robots and Diapers, and it was horrible. The way it worked was we would have 3 readers on something, and those 3 readers, well, we would have up to 5 readers. If the first 3 readers rejected it, it was rejected. It just went. That was one of the things I changed. Was originally they had 5 readers on everything, and basically I said, look, if it's that big of a lemon, let's just go ahead and get rid of it. And so that's what we did. And I read it, rejected it. Another person read it. All the reading was done anonymously, so I didn't know who had read it. That came back to bite me later. The second person that read it accepted it full on, which meant we had different ratings. The top rating was pass this on to the executive board. 2 more people read it and saw it exactly the same way I did. So I went into the little office area, and I'm doing up the rejection letter on that. And our managing editor at the time, Scott Parkin, comes in, and he looks at the story I'm doing the rejection for. He goes, "That's Robots and Diapers. Are you rejecting that?" I said, "Scott, of course we're rejecting it. This thing is hideous. Have you read it?" And he said, "Yes, I have. I'm the one that said to pass it on to the executive board," Scott being 50% of the executive board, which meant that it had to go on to the executive board. And I told him, I said, I don't understand, Scott. I said, this thing is, it's terrible. And he said, well, there's 2 things I'm going to tell you about it. One, I've already discussed with the executive editor, and it is going to be printed. He said, the other thing to realize is we're going to cut it. And he thumbed through the manuscript, came to about page 10, and put a little X on the manuscript and said, we're cutting everything up to this point. And then he turned about 4 more pages over, and he made another little X. And he said, and this is where we're going to cut everything after this point. I said, okay, it's your decision, but I disagree. He says, and that's why you disagreeing, that's why you are going to lead the team that does the editing on this thing. And so my claim to fame at the Leading Edge magazine was taking this hideous story. And you might think, well, so you edited out this part and you edited out the out part. Well, then all you had to do was correct grammar and punctuation for 4 pages. No, because during the story, a lot of times the author is mentioning things that happened before and setting up things that are happening afterwards. And so we had to go through and cut some of that, deep cuts on it. And when I read the story at the end, I loved it. It's a really good story. If you get a chance to look at it, I suggest it. But that kind of paved the way, and eventually I was promoted to be the associate editor. I'm to this day flattered beyond belief, because that position was created specifically for me, and it was done away with when I left. I don't know why. I honestly still to this day don't know why. I've asked Scott, the guy who created it, and he said, well, we wanted you on the board, and that's about all he'll say about it. But that gave me the experience to understand a little further on the thought process on what goes into what stories are published. And it became something that really set the stage for me. When I talk about my experience at the Leading Edge, I let people know that I walked in the foot treads of giants. Oh God! All of a sudden, I can't remember the author's name. David Farland. Farland? And I'm just drawing a complete blank. I knew I should have written this down. David Farland, I think, is it. He is a best-selling writer. He came from the Leading Edge. He was there right before me. Another one that was there right before me was M. Shane Bell. He went on. He had one book published, and then it died. But the executive board, when I was there, was Scott Parkin and Russell Asplund, both of whom went on to win the L. Ron Hubbard Writers of the Future. Well, be a finalist. I don't think they have a top thing in that. Be a finalist in the L. Ron Hubbard Writers of the Future contest. So it was a major area to be at the time. And most of what I know, I can attribute directly to these two people taking me under their wing and saying, this is what makes a good story. This is what sells, which is a little bit different than what makes a good story. This is what sells, and this is what people don't want to see. With RP Games was started in 2012. Again, we were inspired by the Girl Genius webcomic, and that's where a good chunk of our steampunk comes from. We're pretty proud of the fact that the folios gave us special permission to use the term spark in our books. That's the term that they coined for their webcomic. We've moved away a lot from the role-playing side and moved more to the books right now, because the problem with the role-playing side is it's long. It's really long. A book being written, by the time when I receive a book for publication, after the author has made all the initial changes, there is about a 3-month period of time where I'm working with that author. And what we're doing is I'm saying, okay, this scene, and we'll get to this a little bit later, this scene needs to be condensed, this scene needs to be lengthened. This scene, I'm looking at cutting. I can't speak for all authors because this is a system that I created, but given that it's something that you really have to do as a publisher, I wouldn't be surprised if everybody does it. I'll mark things as green, yellow, or red. Green means I want the author to take a look at it. I'm not saying you need to change. I'm just saying that, hey, I'm looking at this particular section. Yellow means I'm not really thrilled with what I'm seeing here. And red means fix it or I delete it. I've done that, I think, to Chaya maybe 2 or 3 times. It's not something I do very often. I try to really work with the author on that. If I could write the novel, I would write the novel. I can't, so I have to hire somebody else to do it. And I try to trust the people on that. So the near future with us is what we're planning on doing is we're looking to eventually get back to the gaming thing, but right now the big push is the novels. That brings me to what everybody's here for. I just wasted 15 minutes of your time. Sorry about that. Really what you're here for is to hear what it is that we look for in a novel. There is, if you're familiar with Fur Affinity, I suggest you go there and look up Lady Sajani. Sajani is S-A-J-A-N-I. That is Chaya's Fur Affinity account, and she publishes, she posts a writer's journal every week on Wednesdays, and the writer's journal gives a lot of good hints on things that I've worked with her on getting the novels polished up and ready. Some of the stuff I don't totally agree with her on, but it's good to have an author's perspective. She tends to be very upbeat and very open. One of her ongoing things is she'll tell them, I'm not going to tell you not to do this. And really, one of my pet peeves as a publisher is when I hear from another publisher, go, oh no, don't do that. Or, oh, you have to do this. That is such a sad state of affairs because it's really limiting the creative process. Unfortunately, when you hear that from publishers, other than me, do listen to it, do pay attention to it, because I don't want you to get rejected because you say, oh, well, this guy over at this publishing company said not to worry about it. No, if they're telling you that, then definitely listen to them. As a publisher too, another thing that's kind of interesting with a lot of Chaya stuff, what you'll see is do this, do this, do this. As a publisher, people ask me, well, what don't I do? And they ask her, what do I do? I'm not really sure where that comes from. It really doesn't have any bearing on anything. Like I said, I tend to ramble, but I thought I would mention it because it's kind of humorous. One thing that came up very recently that I've noticed that a lot of authors don't understand, and it doesn't matter for my submissions so much, but it will kill you with most other publishers. You need to understand what word count is. I know you know what word count is. I'm not saying that you don't know what word count is. Obviously, it's the number of words that's in your novel. But what a lot of people don't understand on that is word count is cost to the publisher. And if you submit a first novel that is 300,000 words, that publisher is going to look at it and going to say, this is already, as a new author, high risk. How can I cut costs to make sure my risk is lower? And 300,000 words is very high risk. The production cost gets really high on that. You're limited on the ways that you can do the cover. I won't get into the technicalities of that, but the cost ends up actually going up after a certain point. It's about 150,000 words. So from 65,000 words to about 150,000 words, the cost is slowly going down per page. When you hit 150,000 words, the cost actually starts going up a little bit because of different things that have to be done in the production that I can't cut corners on anymore. And so what I like authors to understand is if you're doing a first novel, try to keep it under, well, not under, but around 65,000 words. Technically, a novel is 55,000. That's a little short for most people. Most people read a 55,000 word novel and go, ugh. I feel like I ate too small of a portion there. 65 is about the length of the first Harry Potter book, to give you an idea of how much that is. So when you're writing and you're doing your first story, make sure that you're writing it in a way that the publisher can look at it and go, okay, this can be cost effective for me. Those who are editing that have read the first Harry Potter book probably could tell you, wow, that was really heavily edited. And it was. And you can see by the time she does the last one where the editor very dumbly said, I'm not going to edit any of this. It ends up being totally huge. But it is a lot easier on the publisher if you can just keep it around that length to begin with. For sending your manuscripts out, one thing I've seen, and fortunately this book is gone for the most part. I mean, you can still buy it, but in my day there was this big old book. It was about this thick, called Writer's Market, and it was it was an annual publication, and it listed all of the publishers that they could find, and gave the addresses and a little basic on the guidelines on submissions. And what writers would do is they just send out to all these different publishers. You need to have a little bit of a thick skin as an author. Chances are you're going to get rejected. But then again, why would you do something that's going to just generate more rejection letters? I get submissions and I read them and I'm like, you have no idea what I even print. Okay, mainstream fiction? We don't do mainstream fiction. Okay, we only do stuff in the world of Terra. So if you're submitting to me, you need to look at what it is that I print. And based on that, is your story going to fit, yes or no? If it's not going to fit, then save yourself the rejection letter and save a publisher some time. Don't go ahead and send it. There are two things that you'll hear a publisher say is they are either accepting, they're either soliciting manuscripts or they are not soliciting or unsolicited manuscripts. The difference between those two is the first one is we're asking for manuscripts. The term that we use at Rossi Publishing Games is open submission. We actually have one of those right now. If you do spells or magic items for D20 based games, there's an open submission on that. There's an open submission on a type of novel that you can submit for. That you probably want to go ahead and email me for the specifics on, because that one's really complicated. You can email me at Carl, C-A-R-L, at Rossi, R-O-S-S-I, publishinggames.com. If you're interested in doing a novel, I will warn you, it's going to be kind of steampunk. It's before the game timeline, so it's not as steampunk as the actual game. It's going to use our wolf race, the Vicati, and I can get you the submission guidelines on that. Also, on that one, you will be working with a co-author. We already have the co-author picked out, so I'm just looking for somebody that can give her a hand and help her get going. And Chaya is not listening to this, so I can say Chaya is kind of flighty. Let's see, I mentioned research what's being published. Another thing, this doesn't come up so much with Rossi Publishing Games because we don't really have anything. We're not very draconian. I'll look at something, I'll go, okay, that works. But a lot of places have guide submission guidelines, and people don't read these. And it was horrible with the Leading Edge because we had very specific guidelines. Everything was supposed to be anonymous. We didn't want to know who you were. As a matter of fact, one of the jokes there, I'll kind of side trail here. I don't know if you've heard of him because he's not as big as he used to be, but David Brin, really big science fiction author, actually submitted something to us just because he thought he got a kick out of the fact that it was anonymous. And he got a kick out of the fact that we actually did comments on the stories. We'd actually send comments back. They still do, by the way. You can look them up online and send submissions to the Leading Edge. It's a great way to get comments on your stories. If you get 3, you were fast lane to the rejection. If you get 5, you might have come pretty close. Anyway, oh wow. The thing with being my age is every now and again, your brain just goes completely blank. Oh, the guidelines. We would get at the Leading Edge, we would get them with the name on every single page. And what that meant for me as fiction director is I had to sit there with a big old Sharpie and go over it. And some of these people were using some of the old laser printers where it actually had like raised type on there. And so you had to take the Sharpie and rub it over there enough times to dissolve the raised type so that it could get rid of the name. It was a real pain in the butt. And I wish people had just gone with the guidelines. Publishers other than the Leading Edge, and they might have changed this. They might do this now too. You don't meet the guidelines. They use it as a kind of gateway. You don't meet the guidelines, then you're not going to be able to work with them in the future. And there's no reason to waste time with your story. You'll really see it with the big publishers. I was looking at some of their stuff. I think it's Del Rey. They have the same guidelines from when I was learning publishing back in 1989. Courier font, what is it, 10 pica, I think it's called, which is the predecessor to font size, double spaced, X number of inches from the top on the first page. It's just on and on, all these really weird, and they use it as a gateway. If you're not reading the guidelines, your stuff is just going, it isn't even making it to the slush pile. It's going straight into the garbage. Query letters. The Leading Edge didn't use query letters at all. As a matter of fact, the first thing I did when I processed something when it came in was I took the query and I threw it in the garbage. There was absolutely nothing to do with it. The readers were never going to see it, and they were the ones who were deciding what was going somewhere. That's not the case with most places. I do now look at your query letter, and there's 2 things that I'm looking for on it. The first one is what's called the elevator pitch. Hopefully you've heard of this, because I'm not really good at describing it. But let's say that we're going somewhere and I'm on an elevator and you get in the elevator on one floor and you recognize who I am and you want to pitch your story to me. We press that button, you start pitching the story. At the next floor, I get off. That's all the time you had to pitch your story to that publisher. And that's what they're looking for. I've seen query letters where the description of the novel is 3 pages long. Okay, that's how I would write a query. Like I said, I ramble, I'm all over the place. And so if I were to do a query, yes, it would probably be 3 pages long, but I would reject my own query. I would throw it out. What I want to see with a writer is not, well, there's 2 things, and I will get into what I'm looking for story-wise in it. But the first thing I'm really looking for is, can you convey an idea simply and concisely? If you can't, you probably need to work on that a lot more. I'm not really trusting your novel writing ability. The other thing I'm looking for is originality. Now, here's where a lot of people get into trouble on this. I read a lot. I've read a lot. And when you do the summary of a story, a lot of times what I see goes way too basic. And so I'll read it and I'll go, how is this any different than these 50 other stories I've read with the same basic plot? For an example of that, I thought I would read, this again is Fugitive's Trust. It's cover art by Golden Druid. And I thought I would read the back part of this so that you can kind of see how things develop in an elevator pitch. This is a prequel story, so it's assumed that the reader already knows the main character. In your case, obviously that's not going to be true. But for this one, it matched nicely with what it was I wanted to explain here. Before she rose to be the pirate queen of Terra, Sejani was a rather selfish and uncaring petty criminal. Sent to Radaar to go to school, the 15-year-old wants nothing more than to return home to her friends and continue her shadowy lifestyle. Things do not get much more generic than this. You got a kid, they're willfully rebelling, and they want to run away. Wow. There's nothing really interesting about that to me. So we'll move on to the next paragraph, because you do have about this much time on an elevator pitch. When the chance presents itself, she takes up with an escaped Vicati slave, Vicati are their wolf people, and tries to make her way back to Kativan. Okay, it's a little more specific, but still, this is your generic teenage runaway story. Here's where it changes. What is already a difficult trip quickly turns deadly when the human nation not only mounts an all-out assault on the young pair, but also prepares to go to war with Varkylia. Okay, I ran away as a teenager. I didn't have a whole nation trying to chase me down and kill me, and they definitely weren't trying to go to war over me. We've now entered something that's a little bit different. Have I read books that actually have the similar thing? Yeah, actually I have, because I've read a lot of books. But it's different. Something finally set it apart. And when you're doing your query, that's what you want. You want to find something in the story that you can latch onto and tell the publisher, hey, this is something different about my story. This is what sets it apart. This is what's going to sell my story. I like to have fun with this one when I do panels. So hopefully there's people listening that can answer this question for me. What is the most frequent reason that I will reject a story? Any guesses on that? Let's see. Oh, it wasn't scrolling. So if I was missing your question, spelling and grammar. Thank you, Fox, for giving the common wrong answer. I hear that one all the time. When I was just starting out at the leading edge, when we did editing, we had to enter the story. We received a rough manuscript, and we would ask if they could send us a disc. but it didn't happen. It just never happened. And so the thing with that was that, make sure I'm lack of original ideas, flat, boring story, grammar and punctuation. Yes, and what Benjer is saying is what I'm getting at. When we used to do the editing, we had to enter that thing in, and then to verify that we got it exactly the way the author wanted, we had somebody read it backwards, including the punctuation, and another person at the screen checking it to make sure we got it word for word as it was. And then that was also done after editing. Editing was a little bit more of a thing. What do I do as editing now as a publisher? I right click on it, and chances are the machine tells me what I need to fix. So editing is actually not that big of a deal anymore. Not like it was. If you show a disregard for grammar and punctuation, yes, I'm going to reject it. However, I don't see it that often. Most people now are educated enough, or they'll hire an editor, which is something else I can get into. Making sure I'm not running out of time here, because yes, I ramble like crazy. The big thing actually that I reject when you say Vixie Fox, when you say you do not want that job, is that the job of a publisher, or the job of the editor, or that poor sap that has to read that whole freaking thing backwards? That was actually how you got promoted with Leading Edge magazine, is if you were willing to do that. Is it because the author is stubborn? I don't actually deal with the author when I'm making the decision. I have to kind of interpolate some things. And there is a period of time in between when the contract is actually signed, where I can, if you're a real pain in the butt, I can just say, you know what, this isn't going to work. Reading it backwards. Here's the interesting thing on that, Vixie. I'm dyslexic. I worked as an editor for the Leading Edge magazine. I worked as an editor on the school newspaper for years. I have probably about a 10-year experience in editing, and I'm dyslexic. Reading it backwards was just, to me, was horrible, but I managed somehow. We didn't find out I was dyslexic until I took accounting in college. No, the big thing that gets stories rejected is what I call pacing. I've also heard it referred to as rhythm. Pacing, and Chaya has a really good writing journal on pacing. Actually, I think it's 2. Pacing is how fast you tell the story. The example that Chaya gave that I like to use now, because it's so much more creative than anything I came up with before, is if you pop something in your mouth and it's too hot, what do? You spit it out. If you have something in your mouth that you really like, that tastes really good, you keep it in there, you savor it. And that's what pacing comes down to, is these little non-important things. Are you spending too much time on them? Are you wasting too many words on them? And these things that are important to the story, that give a certain amount of emotive power to your writing, are you spending the right amount of time on those? Usually, I can tell if a writer has that down within the first 4 pages. To give you an idea, so the first 1,000 words, that would be 4 pages on most manuscripts, or on the books that I showed you. Those are about 350 words per page, so that'd be about 3 pages. I could tell usually that fast if you have the grasp of the pacing, and that is by a long shot. I'd say about 80% of what I reject is the author has no concept of pacing. And it doesn't surprise me, because it's not something that gets talked about at a lot of the writers' workshops. I'm kind of running a little bit out of time. I did want to touch on editing. I'll just kind of skim through that, though. Editing, a lot of writers go out and hire a
just so you know,
editor.
you do have until 2:30 for this panel, so you're still got 20
I just wanted to leave a lot of time to answer questions
Cool.
if necessary.
Just wanted to make sure you got that.
Yep, got it. Thank you. Hiring editors. Oh, did I might have missed something here. Yeah, I did. I'll definitely go back and touch on that in a moment. Be careful when you hire editors. The first editor that we hired for the Wolf's Pawn, I could trusted completely to edit that story, and it went to press And I went back and I was reading it just for kicks and giggles later on, and I was like, wow, this is horrible. And I went through and I looked at one of the older copies of the manuscripts, well, digital copies, and I swear that editor put in mistakes. It was terrible. I now handle all the editing on my own. Trying to be good at pacing with this panel. I'm horrible at pacing. Like I said, that's why I have Chaya do the art stuff now. Be very careful when you hire an editor. It is better for you to learn how to do that yourself. And like I said too, I'm not hyper picky about it. I want to see that you have an understanding of the basics and that you're not making a lot of extra work for me. But my biggest worry is the pacing and a lot of other technical things, which I wish I had more time to go into, but I was trying to hit the big ones. Oh, this one is kind of big. I want to make sure I hit this then. It's better if you can edit it yourself. One thing, it's also in one of Chaya's journals, and she didn't quite cover it the same way I would have, but the words that, this, had, and contractions. This is another area that it doesn't bother me too much if I see it on a manuscript that I'm reviewing for publication, but it is something that can help and give you a few bonus points on it. Go through your manuscript and read it, and every time you see the word that, read the sentence without it. If you can read it without it, then get rid of it, please. For some reason, it's become quite the disfluency with writers. They like to add the word that. As a matter of fact, I will say these 3 changes here on Chaya's first novel, making these changes eliminated 25 pages from her manuscript. So that means that, what would that be? About 12%. There were other changes, I guess, in addition to that. I don't know how much the other ones were. The big ones were these 3 here. This, same thing as that. Chaya doesn't have a problem with that one as much. But a lot of, again, another disfluency. A lot of writers will throw it in, and it doesn't need to be there. It breaks up the rhythm of the reading for the reader. It breaks up the thought process in a way that it's kind of hard to describe, but it's something that we do have to work. I don't know why this doesn't scroll. Makes it kind of hard here. What's that? Somebody does some Bridger does some light editing for friends. Commas. Oh, the nice thing on commas though is Word will tell you where you mess up on that. Had is another big one. A lot of times you can shorten the phrase if you eliminate the word had. It'll mean rewriting. It's not as easy as just eliminating a word. So it does mean a little rewriting. And the huge one is contractions. You don't talk without them. So the example I like to give is I won't, I will not, and I will not. These are 3 different ways of basically saying the same exact words, putting the, as my wife likes to say, the emphasis on the wrong syllable. What you're doing is you're changing where the emphasis is. Contract the word unless if you read it and put emphasis on the second word and it emphasizes what it is you're trying to say, then leave it non-contracted, because that's how you would speak as well. The contractions are really big in dialogue, which is the next thing I want to touch on. Yeah, I'm over the time I originally said. But especially if there's a comma before that. You know, I've never even looked at that. No pun intended. Unless you're Commander Data. Oh, as far as the contractions thing, there is an interesting thing in the novels. You will find places where they're not used. I don't want to do any spoilers on them, but there are some characters that don't use contractions. That would be another reason. Yeah, taking out unnecessary words to make the joke stronger. There's Chaya covers that in one of her journals as well. The eliminating unnecessary words. Be cautious on how you define an unnecessary word. Part of writing is an art form, and if you strip out all the technically unnecessary words, a lot of times it's a lot less artistic and sounds a little stinted. Let's see. I promised I was going to cover stuff on writing for furries. Tara has 2 furry races. We have the Vicati, which are the main characters in the story there. They are wolf people. There's also in the game timeline, but not in the novel timeline, the Haramau, which are cat people. Touching really quick on that, and then I'll open it up for questions. Because this is the big one when you're writing for furry characters. They need to be human. I know that sounds like really weird, but they need to be human in enough of a way that the reader relates to them. Okay. In particular, the story behind the Vicati is that you had these 2 armies. They marched into this jungle. They're ready to meet the next day, and the people have a magical sleep come over them. And when they wake up, they're now Vicati. They were human. They're now Vicati. You can read this. I was going to read it out loud, but I definitely want to have time for questions. There's well, actually, you can't read it yet. In Fugitives Trust, Chaya talks a little bit about that. Vicati are humans that became wolves. And that's a good rule of thumb to go on, even if your race isn't. Keep them somewhat human. If you make them all cat-like, nobody's really going to relate to them. And that's going to be a very individual thing too. Okay, that's going to be one writer, there might be more cat. Another writer, there might be less. But there needs to be some of that element of humanity in it, so that, like, for instance, my animal is a kit fox. I don't relate to cats. So if I read furry stuff and it's all cat, I'm like, okay, okay. But if there's that human element, then no matter what, there's something that the people can relate on. A good example of that is Hamlet, the play Hamlet by Shakespeare. Go through there sometime if you're into reading Shakespeare, and find your one friend that matches every single character in there, and chances are you'll be able to find them. Oh, and just as a parting note too, make them somewhat likable. There's a real trend right now to making just really not very nice people that aren't very likable into main characters, and I don't really understand that. But that is all I had on that. So we can open it up for questions if you want, and I promise I'll try scrolling, because it still is not scrolling for me. You're into tabletop. What do you think about character development in Shadowrun? There's humans, elves, and metahumans in a cyberpunk dystopia. Writing a story similar, but adding in furries. Furries will add in to that particular to Shadowrun really well. It's been a long time since I've played it. My problem with Shadowrun was the math on it. The math's pretty easier on the player end, but they didn't do a lot of the developer end math on it, and it creates some kind of interesting situations where, you know, if you want to do something, you can do it, but you're going to need a wheelbarrow full of 6-sided dice. So yeah, that brings up in general one of my big pet peeves with when I read independent publishers doing role-playing games. They do the math on the player end, they don't do the math on the developer end. So for instance, most people, I'm going to guess, are kind of familiar. Let me get a drink. I had this here so I could do this. When they do ability scores, for instance, in Dungeons and Dragons, you roll 3d6, and that gives you a score. You will never use that score again. The player doesn't use that anymore. You go to another table, you look up a bonus, and the bonus is what you use. So why do you roll 3d6 to get the score, to get the bonus? Well, the answer to that is Because if you roll D6 to get the bonus, you now have a flat curve. You now have a flat plot, mathematical plot. Your chance of getting a 1 is the same as your chance of getting 2, 3, 4, 5, or 6. If you roll 3d6, what you'll find is a bell curve. And what that means is that the majority of characters on the majority of stats are going to be somewhere in the middle. And you'll have a few that are below and a few that are above. And that's what they're going for on that. They want to make sure that the character is has a solid average on it. And that's the type of math that often gets forgotten on that. Does the author's background mean much to a publisher? I'll be kind of blunt on that. If you put in something about your background and you put it in such a way that you're saying, this was horrible at the leading edge, by the way. Oh, I'm a student at the university. I freaking don't care. I'm looking pretty much at at your ability to write. If you put it in such a way that is trying to get you a little bit of an advantage, to be honest, I'll probably just throw it out. If you need that advantage, then I can probably find somebody more qualified. Yeah, it's a little blunt, but I really don't know how else to put it. I go entirely on merit. It's the same thing with our artists. Everybody we work with, you submit to me what it is that you have. If it's good, you will, then we'll use it. If it's not, then if it's close, a lot of times I'll work with you, and I do try to give helpful hints. But I do prefer very much just to keep it completely open. There's so much of a tendency right now to discriminate one way or another on different things. And I would rather just stay totally open and completely focused on ability. That said, you might find other publishers that are different on that. I definitely don't speak on behalf of the industry. Thomas Covenant. I never read that one. My first short story that I was talking about earlier, people compared it to it, and for some reason that just more dice, steeper the curve. Yeah. Yeah. Hopefully that answers the question on the background. It's kind of a sad thing because in some ways I would like to consider some things, but it's gotten to the point now where it's a, well, you have to because of this. And no, I'd rather just go by merit. Any other questions, or does that give me a little bit of time to maybe go back into, oh, I do need to touch on one very important thing. Don't get scammed. Okay. Let me explain how an agent works. I meant to do this earlier. An agent makes money when an agent sells your product. Okay. They do not make money by you paying them to theoretically sell your product. The problem with it is there are some legitimate ones that charge like reading fees, and I can understand that. That makes sense to a limited degree. But the truth is there's a lot of dishonest ones out there that'll take your money and then tell you, well, and I've seen this in rejection letters. Well, I've talked to 100 different publishing houses and I haven't been able to sell your story. Well, there's a problem with that. Okay, what did they talk to the 100 different publishing houses about? They don't really say that they talked to them about your story. And so, and sometimes they'll be like, well, I, managed to sell, I sold through this author and this author and this author. And, that's great. They probably got lucky. They probably found an author that they could sell. But like you said, just I've seen some, I don't want to get into the horror stories because some of them, people who know me would be able to go, yeah, that happened too. And I really don't want to call the person out, but yeah, I've seen some pretty horrible things happen, including a really good author who is now on the gaming industry's blacklist. Yes, their agent did that to them. Very sad thing. I'm doing great. I guess that's to me. Thank you. I'm trying to balance with the school taking lots of money versus reality. Are you talking about going to school to be a writer? Wow. Maybe. Read Chaya's journals. Submit some stuff, practice. And it's like Chaya likes to really say, get out and live. It's your life experiences that are going to do more than your classes. You have any tips on publishing a book from abroad? I'm looking for an American agent or a publisher. Agents, again, like I said, make sure it's somebody that you're submitting to like you would submit to a publisher. I don't really, without knowing what it is you're specifically targeting, I can't really help you. What I would do is find a book that's close to it, see who publishes it, and send it to them. That's usually the best way to do it. Lots and lots of horror stories where I could go on. Maybe some convention I'll do a panel on publishing horror stories. Just kind of a fun one. There's my wife, when we were working at the Leading Edge, that's where we met, was at the Leading Edge magazine. And when we were working there were several little folklore things that came up. And she was taking a college class on folklore. And so she actually recorded a bunch of these little folklore things. And one of the funny ones was if you proofread the interior of your product to the point where there's no errors in it, then automagically you're going to end up with a typo on your cover. And so we actually always, just pure superstition, I don't know if the Leading Edge still does this, I wouldn't be surprised if they do, but we always left one error in. Just to give you an example, this is the first book we did, and believe it or not, there is a typo on the cover. You'll miss it because there's no way that you would know. But the title of the book was Wolf's Pawn. There was no "the" on it. I got the cover back from the artist. I looked at it. I was like, oh, that looks right. And then as I'm doing this, putting in the data for the different distribution channels and stuff, I realized that it doesn't match. We had Wolf's Pawn on all our marketing material, everything that was out there, and there's this "the" just randomly stuck in there. And so now if you go out to Amazon, you go out to Barnes & Noble, you go to Apple Books, you'll always see it now listed as The Wolf's Pawn, but that is a typo. There's another one on the back too. It's a case of, normally our rules would say that a contraction should have been made and it wasn't. So yeah, that happens all the time. I could do tons of horror stories. Okay, I'll try that next time. The Publishing Horror Stories panel. That is not Leading Edge specific either. I have my wife's uncle also works in publishing, and the magazine he did also did that. They always left an error in, and they even had a contest where if you could find an error in the magazine, and there'll always be at least one, they'd give you a free year subscription. Okay, any other questions? I feel like the problem with this, I feel like I'm talking to myself because I can't see anybody. I can just see this little number that says 28, which reminds me, just kind of another fun story. This is the second panel that I've done. I'm not as humorous as the pair that did that What's in the Box panel I watched earlier. I feel a little kind of incompetent, so any compliments, I'm all for them. But the first panel I did, it was with my son, who also designed some of the games with me, and we're sitting in the room for the panel, and it's filling up, and there's people standing along the back. We're just like, wow, this is amazing, isn't it? People are actually really interested in our steampunk panel here. And somebody pops their head in and says, oh, if you're looking for this panel here, it moved it. It's over here. And I'm serious. All but like 6 people got up and walked right out on us. So we're left with this little panel of 6 people. So when I went into this one, I was like, okay, my ego is not attached to anything to do with this. Yeah, it is really hard to get used to this, speaking into the void. Yeah, you can't see the people to see how they're reacting. I tell a joke, and there's not going to be any laughter, and I don't know if it's because some people type in lol, but for the most part, no. Yeah, there we go. I mentioned earlier, my mind blank. Yeah, here we go again. Yeah, if you are looking for really good advice as an author, Fur Affinity, Lady Sajani, Sajani. She's also on So Furry and how do you say it? Whistle? I don't know. She's on those other 2. I think it's Chaya. Well, I was saying Chaya. It's said Chaya. If you see me going back and forth, it's because somebody corrected me, and which is a pen name, by the way. So she's also on there. You can find her on there. Does the company have a website? Yes. RossiPublishingGames.com. It sucks. It's really bad. We're working with an investor right now, and the first thing he said, well, what is it you need help on? And I said, our website. And he went and took a look at the website, and he says, you're right. You definitely need help on the website. What you'll find there is a wiki. Yeah. Okay, that's weird. Okay, didn't expect a phone call. But I guess that's it for time. Again, my email is Carl, C-A-R-L, at Rossi, R-O-S-S-I, publishinggames.com. Feel free to write to me and ask any other additional questions. Feel free to message Chaya through the Fur Affinity or other sites. And it's definitely, yes, thanks for spelling that out for people. Why did I not think of typing it in? Duh. Okay, I'm 51. I'm actually pretty tech savvy, but every now and again, I'm back on that reading backwards to the screen thing. How do you spell Chaya? C-H-A-A-Y-A. And she's pretty happy to talk to people and whatnot. To be honest, those sites are like, gosh, I don't want to say that because it almost sounds insulting. Chaya has really bad PTSD. She served in the, there you go, that's good. She served in the U.S. Army during Operation Iraqi Freedom. And so she gets really jittery in public. I tried to get her to do this panel because she would have been a lot more fun. But except for the fact that she would have froze up and ran right off the screen. Yeah, she's more than happy to, yep, that's the wiki. She's more than happy to talk to people on the pages and whatnot. She's usually thrilled. The writing columns are very good. They do not always portray me in a favorable light, but that's okay. Yeah, it's been a lot of fun doing this, despite, like I said, the fact that I can't see you. But hopefully, again, there's the open call for submissions on the novel. You'll have to get the specifics on that from me, and there is the open call for if you design spells or magic items for D20. If you don't know what that means, you don't. Public and private. Well, I actually don't have a problem with public speaking. I never have. My job in the Army, I was in the Army too, was a chaplain's assistant. Everybody say hi to my wife. And so I did, I was always doing, yeah, somebody said hi. I was always, not necessarily public speaking, but always out there among people. And yeah. Yeah, don't know what else to say. But again, it's been a lot of fun. They haven't cut me off, so I guess if you have other questions, Maybe now that I said that, they'll cut me off. Oh, okay, so it'll automatically cut. Oh, so you're warning me that it's not you doing it, but the system will just go ahead and just. That makes sense, actually. You'd kind of want something like that. So I'll just go ahead and save the trouble. But thanks again for having me. And hopefully I'll do another panel on the publishing horror stories like people are asking.